The Crystal Haven Hotel, nestled in the heart of downtown Chicago, was renowned for its opulence, impeccable service, and a clientele list that boasted some of the most powerful figures in the world. It was a place where nothing less than perfection was tolerated, a standard zealously upheld by its manager, Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was a force of nature, sharp, composed, and unrelenting in her pursuit of excellence. At just 32, she had turned the struggling establishment into a top-tier destination, with her name whispered among the elite as one of the best in the hospitality business. But her success came at a cost. Evelyn's personal life was nearly non-existent, her every waking moment consumed by work. The day began like any other. Evelyn, clad in her tailored navy suit, reviewed the day's agenda in her office when her assistant, Carla, poked her head in with a curious expression. "The new hire is here," Carla said, her voice laced with amusement. Evelyn barely looked up from her laptop. "Send them to HR." "Normally, yes," Carla replied, "but this one's different." Before Evelyn could respond, the door swung open, and in walked a man who didn't belong in the meticulously polished world of Crystal Haven. He wore a plain white shirt, rolled up at the sleeves, and dark slacks that somehow looked both ordinary and expensive. His disheveled brown hair framed a face that was too striking for a typical bellhop. Piercing green eyes scanned the room with an intensity that made Evelyn sit up straighter. "I'm James," he said, his deep voice filled with confidence. "The new bellhop." Evelyn's eyebrows lifted in surprise. It wasn't every day that someone waltzed into her office unannounced, especially not with such a commanding presence. "You're late," she said curtly, recovering her composure. James smiled, an infuriatingly charming expression. "First day jitters, I suppose." Evelyn's sharp eyes narrowed. She wasn't easily charmed, and something about James seemed off. His demeanor was too confident, too at odds with the nervous energy of most new employees. "Carla, take him to HR," Evelyn said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Carla hesitated but nodded, gesturing for James to follow her. As they left, Evelyn shook her head, brushing off the strange encounter. But James's arrival was only the beginning of an unusual day. Hours later, Evelyn conducted her usual rounds through the hotel. Every detail had to be perfect. Fresh flowers in the lobby, impeccable cleanliness in the hallways, and a staff that anticipated every guest's need before it was voiced. She stopped by the front desk, where James was stationed, chatting casually with a guest. Evelyn observed him from a distance, her sharp instincts kicking in. He moved with a natural ease, exuding confidence that didn't match his supposed inexperience. "James," she called, her tone crisp. He turned, flashing that same charming smile. "Yes, ma'am?" Evelyn gestured for him to follow her to a quiet corner of the lobby. "You're new here," she began, folding her arms. "Yet you seem unusually comfortable." James shrugged, his expression unreadable. "I'm a fast learner." Evelyn leaned closer, her voice low. "Are you here to work? Or are you here for something else?" For a fleeting moment, something flickered in James's eyes. A hint of surprise, quickly masked. "Just here to work, ma'am," he said smoothly. "Isn't that what you hired me for?" Evelyn didn't buy it, but she let it go. For now. That evening, Evelyn stayed late, as usual, poring over reports in her office. She was about to call it a night when the fire alarm blared through the building. Her heart jumped as she grabbed her phone and rushed out. In the chaos of staff evacuating guests, Evelyn spotted James calmly directing people toward the exits. "James," she called. He turned, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "There's a small fire in the service kitchen. I called it in, but it's spreading fast." Evelyn followed him toward the service area, where smoke billowed from under the kitchen doors. The heat was intense, and the acrid smell of burning grease filled the air. "We need to clear this area," Evelyn said, coughing. James grabbed her arm, stopping her. "You shouldn't be here." Evelyn shook him off. "This is my hotel." She reached for the fire extinguisher on the wall, But before she could act, James stepped in front of her, taking control. With swift precision, he doused the flames, his movements too practiced for a bellhop. As the fire subsided, Evelyn stared at him, her chest heaving. "Who are you?" she demanded. James turned to her, his green eyes unreadable. "I'm just a bellhop, remember?" After the fire was contained, Evelyn returned to her office, but she couldn't focus. Something about James didn't add up. She pulled up his personnel file, which Carla had hastily put together that morning. It was thin, too thin. Just a single page with basic information. No references, no work history. Her phone buzzed with a text from Carla. "Weird thing. I can't find any record of James in the payroll system. Want me to dig?" Evelyn's pulse quickened. Who was this man and why was he really here? Meanwhile, James sat alone in the staff lounge, his confident facade cracking. He glanced at his phone, where a message flashed on the screen. "Have you found out if she's the right one yet? Time is running out." He clenched his jaw, deleting the message. James wasn't who he claimed to be, and whatever his mission was, it involved Evelyn in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that James was hiding something. As she walked the hotel's opulent hallways the next morning, every interaction she had with him replayed in her mind. His confidence, his mysterious calm during the fire, and his paper-thin employee file gnawed at her. Back in her office, she called Carla. "I want everything on James," Evelyn said, her voice clipped. "I don't care if you have to pull his application apart letter by letter. Find out who he is." Carla hesitated. "Do you think he's dangerous?" Evelyn glanced out the window, where she could see James casually helping a guest load luggage into a waiting car. His easy demeanor was infuriating. "No," she admitted, "but he's definitely not a bellhop." That afternoon, Evelyn decided to keep an eye on James herself. She told herself it was part of her job, keeping her staff in line, but deep down, she was driven by a curiosity she couldn't ignore. She found him in the penthouse suite, polishing silver trays with an efficiency that seemed almost out of place. "James," she said, stepping inside. He straightened immediately, his smile disarming. "Boss, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Evelyn folded her arms. "You tell me, why were you in the service kitchen during the fire last night?" "I was doing my job," he replied smoothly. "And saving the day isn't part of your job description," she countered, her sharp gaze narrowing. "You handled that extinguisher like a pro. You've done that before, haven't you?" James chuckled, a low, self-assured sound. "I grew up helping out at my uncle's restaurant. Fires happen." Evelyn's instincts told her there was more to the story, but before she could press further, her phone buzzed. Carla had sent her an urgent text. "I found something. You're not going to believe this." Carla met Evelyn in her office minutes later, her face pale and her hands trembling as she placed a folder on the desk. "I ran a background check," Carla said. "James isn't who he says he is." Evelyn opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. What she saw left her breathless. James was actually James Calloway, heir to the Calloway Group, a powerful conglomerate that owned a portfolio of luxury hotels, including Crystal Haven. His father, Richard Calloway, was one of the wealthiest and most ruthless businessmen in the industry. "He's the owner?" Evelyn whispered, incredulous. "Technically," Carla confirmed. "But here's the weird part. He hasn't been involved in the business in years. There's almost no record of him doing anything since he left the company 6 years ago." Evelyn sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. Why would James Calloway be working as a bellhop in his own hotel, pretending to be someone else? Later that evening, Evelyn found James in the lobby, leaning casually against the front desk as he chatted with another employee. She strode up to him, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "We need to talk," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. James's expression didn't falter, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. "Of course," he said, following her to a quiet corner of the lounge. Evelyn turned to him, her arms crossed. "Who are you, really?" James tilted his head, his smile faint. I'm James, your bellhop. Thought we covered that. Cut the act, Evelyn snapped. I know who you are, James Calloway, heir to the Calloway Group. My boss. James's expression darkened, the playful glint in his eyes replaced with something harder. So you found out, he said quietly. Yes, Evelyn replied, her voice firm. Now tell me why you're pretending to be an employee at your own hotel. James hesitated, then sighed. I came back to see if the stories were true. What stories? About you, he said, his gaze locking onto hers. Evelyn blinked, taken aback. Me? James nodded. I've heard rumors about the miracle manager of Crystal Haven. How you took a failing property and turned it into one of the best hotels in the country. My father was skeptical. He thought you were hiding something. So I came here to see for myself. Evelyn's chest tightened with anger. So what? You're spying on me? Testing me? James stepped closer, his expression softening. At first, yes. But now, it's not just about the hotel anymore. Evelyn's breath hitched. She hated the way her pulse quickened under his gaze. The way he could unsettle her with just a few words. You have no idea what you've done, she said, her voice trembling with frustration. I've worked my whole life to build this reputation. Do you have any idea how humiliating it would be if people found out I didn't even know my own boss was working under me? James looked genuinely remorseful. I didn't mean to humiliate you. I just needed to see the truth with my own eyes. And what's your verdict? Evelyn asked bitterly. James hesitated, then said softly, You're everything they said you were and more. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Her anger toward James warred with a strange, unwelcome admiration. Despite his deception, he had stepped into the fire, literally, to protect her hotel. And his words, however frustrating, had carried a sincerity she couldn't ignore. But she wasn't about to let him off the hook so easily. The next morning, she called a meeting with James in her office. If you want to stay here, she began, you'll do it on my terms. No more games, no more lies. You're going to be a bellhop just like you claimed. And you're going to work under me, properly this time. James smirked, clearly amused by her assertiveness. Understood, boss. But as he left her office, Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more complicated and potentially disastrous than she had ever anticipated. The revelation of James Calloway's true identity had left Evelyn's world tilted on its axis. The very idea of her boss, a billionaire heir, posing as a bellhop under her management was absurd, even insulting. Yet here he was, rolling carts, greeting guests, and moving through her hotel like an employee rather than the owner. What unnerved Evelyn the most was how seamlessly James played the role. He was good with guests, his charm effortless, his demeanor confident but not overbearing. Staff adored him. Guests requested him by name. It made Evelyn furious. 2 days after their confrontation, Evelyn called James into her office. He arrived promptly, leaning casually against the doorframe, his disarming smile firmly in place. You wanted to see me, boss? He asked, his tone teasing. Evelyn gestured for him to sit, ignoring the way her pulse quickened at his presence. We need to set boundaries. Boundaries? Yes, she said firmly. You may technically own this hotel, but while you're here as an employee, you follow my rules. James raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained. Fair enough. What are these rules? Rule 1. No interfering with my decisions. If I make a call, you don't question it. Understood, he said, his tone surprisingly sincere. Rule 2. No fraternizing with staff. You're here to work, not to win a popularity contest. James smirked. And here I thought I was just being friendly. Evelyn ignored the comment. Rule 3. You report directly to me. If there's an issue, I deal with it. James leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Anything else? Yes. Evelyn's gaze hardened. You will not use your position as the owner to undermine me or this team. Do I make myself clear? For the first time, James's playful demeanor shifted. He leaned forward, his green eyes locking onto hers. Crystal. Evelyn had hoped the boundaries would establish control, but James seemed to delight in towing the line. Later that day, Evelyn found him in the lobby, surrounded by a group of housekeepers. He was helping fold towels, his easy laughter ringing through the space. "What's going on here?" Evelyn asked, her tone clipped. The housekeepers froze, their expressions ranging from nervous to amused. "Just lending a hand," James said, flashing her a grin. "I see that," Evelyn replied, her patience wearing thin. "But if you're done playing hero, there are guests waiting for their luggage upstairs." James gave her a mock salute. "Right away, boss." As he walked off, one of the housekeepers leaned toward Evelyn and whispered, "I wish all the managers were like him." Evelyn's jaw tightened. James wasn't just charming. He was undermining her authority without even trying. That evening, Evelyn stayed late to prepare for a visit from one of the hotel's VIP guests, a tech mogul known for his exacting standards. She was finalizing arrangements in the grand ballroom when James appeared, leaning casually against the doorway. "Burning the midnight oil?" he asked. Evelyn didn't look up. "What do you want?" "Just checking in," James said, stepping closer. "What's all this for?" "A VIP guest is arriving tomorrow," she replied curtly. "It's none of your concern." James ignored her dismissal and picked up a seating chart from the table. "Tech guy, right? Martin Holmes? He's a perfectionist." Evelyn froze. "How do you know that?" James smirked. "We've met. My father tried to partner with him once. Didn't go well." Evelyn snatched the chart from his hands. "Stay out of this. I don't need your help." James raised his hands in mock surrender. "Suit yourself. But if you change your mind, I know exactly what Holmes likes." Evelyn glared at him. "Good night, James." The next day, the VIP visit was in full swing. Evelyn had gone to great lengths to ensure every detail was perfect, but Martin Holmes was impossible to please. He complained about the lighting in the ballroom, the temperature in his suite, and even the way his coffee was served. By mid-afternoon, Evelyn was barely holding it together. She was reviewing a list of Holmes's demands when James appeared, holding a tray with 2 cups of coffee. "What are you doing here?" Evelyn hissed. "Helping," James said simply, setting the tray down. "Holmes likes his coffee with 2 shots of espresso, a dash of vanilla, and no foam. Trust me." Before Evelyn could protest, James picked up the tray and strode into the VIP lounge. She followed, watching in stunned silence as James greeted Holmes with a casual familiarity that left her speechless. "James Calloway," he said, extending a hand. "It's been a while." Holmes looked surprised but pleased. "Calloway? What the hell are you doing here?" "Just helping out," James replied smoothly. "Thought I'd personally deliver your coffee. How's everything else?" Holmes chuckled. "Better now. This place is impressive. Guess you Callaways finally got something right." Evelyn bit her tongue, fury simmering just beneath the surface. After Holmes left, Evelyn stormed into the staff lounge, where James was chatting with another employee. "We need to talk," she snapped, motioning for him to follow her into an empty conference room. Once the door closed, she rounded on him. "What the hell was that?" James looked genuinely confused. "What was what?" "You undermined me in front of a VIP guest," Evelyn said, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that was?" James's expression hardened. "I wasn't trying to undermine you. I was trying to help." "I don't need your help," she shot back. "I've been running this hotel for years without you. I can handle one difficult guest." James stepped closer, his green eyes blazing. "You're right. You don't need my help. But Holmes was ready to write this place off. I turned that around. Maybe you should focus less on your pride and more on the big picture." Evelyn's chest tightened. She hated that he was right, but she refused to let him have the last word. "Don't confuse my pride with my professionalism," she said coldly. "If you want to play bellhop, fine, but stay in your lane." James held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Understood." That night, as Evelyn reviewed the day's events, She found herself replaying her confrontation with James. His words had struck a nerve, not because they were unfair, but because they were true. She hated the way he challenged her, the way he seemed to see right through her defenses. But what she hated most was the realization that part of her didn't want him to leave. This wasn't just a power struggle anymore. It was something far more dangerous. Evelyn thought she'd reached her limit with James Calloway. His infuriating charm, his knack for undercutting her authority, and the unsettling way he seemed to understand her were enough to push anyone over the edge. But the events of the next few days would take their tenuous dynamic to an entirely new level. It began with a mysterious letter delivered to her office. The envelope was unmarked, the paper thick and expensive. Evelyn opened it cautiously, her brow furrowing as she scanned the message inside. Your loyalty and discretion are being tested. Fail and you risk losing everything you've built here. Watch your back. Her breath hitched. She reread the letter twice, her mind racing. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the tone ominous. Was it from James? Someone in his father's camp? Or was it a competitor trying to rattle her? The timing couldn't have been worse. The hotel was preparing for a high-profile charity gala hosted by one of their wealthiest clients, a real estate magnate named Charlotte Greer. The event was a critical opportunity to showcase Crystal Haven's elite status, and Evelyn couldn't afford any distractions. But as she folded the letter and slipped it into her desk drawer, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was working against her. In the days leading up to the gala, James's behavior shifted. He was still charming and confident, but there was a tension in him that hadn't been there before. Evelyn caught him glancing over his shoulder more often, his easy demeanor faltering when he thought no one was watching. One afternoon, as they were inspecting the ballroom set up together, Evelyn finally confronted him. "What's going on with you?" she asked, crossing her arms. James looked up from the table he was adjusting, his green eyes sharp but guarded. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play coy," she said. "You've been acting different, distracted. If something's wrong, I need to know." James hesitated, then gave her a wry smile. "You're imagining things, boss. I'm fine." Evelyn didn't believe him for a second, but she let it go. For now. The night of the gala arrived, and the hotel was a flurry of activity. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and gold accents, the tables adorned with immaculate floral arrangements. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled as a string quartet played softly in the background. Evelyn moved through the crowd with practiced poise, greeting guests and keeping an eye on every detail. James, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, was stationed near the entrance, assisting with arrivals. For a while, everything went smoothly, but as the evening progressed, Evelyn noticed James slipping away from his post more frequently. When she finally found him, he was in the service corridor, speaking in hushed tones to a man she didn't recognize. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. "James," Evelyn called, her voice firm. Both men turned, but only James seemed genuinely surprised. "Evelyn," he said, stepping forward. "What are you doing back here?" "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, her gaze flicking to the stranger. "Who is this?" The man tipped his hat, his expression neutral. "Just a delivery guy. Dropped off a late shipment for the kitchen." Evelyn didn't buy it. The tension in James's posture, the way his jaw tightened ever so slightly, told her something wasn't right. "Get back to the gala," she said to James, her tone icy. James hesitated, then nodded, walking past her without another word. As the gala wound down, Evelyn found herself replaying the encounter in the service corridor. Who was that man and what was James hiding? She didn't have to wait long for answers. Just as she was preparing to leave for the night, Carla rushed into her office, her face pale. "Evelyn," she said, breathless, "we have a problem." Carla handed her a tablet displaying security footage from earlier that evening. The feed showed James slipping into the kitchen with the stranger from the corridor. Moments later, the two emerged with a black briefcase, which James handed off before returning to the gala. "What is this?" Evelyn demanded, her voice rising. "I don't know," Carla admitted. "But whatever it is, it doesn't look good." Evelyn stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She had given James the benefit of the doubt, despite everything. But now she wasn't sure she could trust him at all. The next morning, Evelyn stormed into the staff lounge, where James was chatting with a housekeeper over coffee. "We need to talk," she said, her tone sharp. James's smile faded as he followed her to a private conference room. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice cautious. Evelyn crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "The footage, the man, the briefcase. Explain. Now." For the first time, James looked genuinely cornered. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "It's not what you think," he said finally. "Then what is it?" Evelyn demanded. James hesitated, then said, "I was handling a private matter, something unrelated to the hotel." "That's not an answer," she snapped. James stepped closer, his expression pleading. "I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But you have to trust me." Evelyn stared at him, her emotions warring. Part of her wanted to believe him, to trust the sincerity in his eyes. But another part, the part that had fought tooth and nail to build her career, couldn't ignore the warning signs. "Trust is earned, James," she said coldly. "And right now, you haven't earned it." That night, Evelyn received another letter. This one even more cryptic than the first. "You've seen the cracks in the facade. Don't ignore them. If you do, you'll regret it." The words sent a chill down her spine. She knew now that whatever game James was playing, she was caught in the middle, and she wasn't sure she could survive it. Evelyn sat in her office, the second cryptic letter crumpled in her hand. The warning was clear, but the sender's identity remained a mystery. Her instincts screamed that it was connected to James, to the strange man in the service corridor, and to the black briefcase. For all her doubts about James, there was one thing Evelyn knew for certain. If she wanted answers, she'd have to confront him directly. No more half-truths or evasion. She grabbed her coat and stormed out of her office, determined to get the truth, no matter the cost. James was in the penthouse suite, ostensibly fixing a glitch in the room's climate control system. Evelyn burst in without knocking, catching him off guard. "You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself," she said, her voice low but furious. James turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Evelyn, I told you—" "No," she interrupted, stepping closer. "No more lies. No more excuses. I want the truth. Why are you here? Who was that man? What was in the briefcase?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked genuinely defeated. "Fine," he said quietly. "You deserve the truth." Evelyn folded her arms, bracing herself. "I came back to Crystal Haven for 2 reasons," James began. "First, to see if it was worth saving. My father wanted to sell it. He thinks it's a waste of resources. I needed to see for myself if it could survive." "And the second reason?" Evelyn pressed. James hesitated, his gaze flickering to the floor. "To protect you." Evelyn blinked, caught off guard. "Protect me? From what?" "My father," James said, his voice filled with quiet anger. "He doesn't just want to sell the hotel, he wants to destroy it. And he thinks taking you down is the fastest way to make that happen." The weight of his words settled over her like a storm cloud. "Why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because you're the heart of this place," James replied. "You turned it into what it is today. If he discredits you, Crystal Haven falls apart." Evelyn stared at him, her mind racing. "And the briefcase? The man in the corridor?" James hesitated, then said, "I was buying time. My father's been sending people here to dig up dirt on you, on the staff, on anything he can use to discredit the hotel. The man you saw was one of his lackeys. I paid him off to back off for now." The revelation left Evelyn reeling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know if I could trust you," James admitted. "I thought if I stayed under the radar, I could handle it without dragging you into the mess." Evelyn's anger flared. Do you realize what you've done? You've made me question everything. My staff, my instincts, my reputation. All because you couldn't just tell me the truth. I know, James said, his voice heavy with regret. And I'm sorry, but I wasn't just trying to protect the hotel. I was trying to protect you. Evelyn opened her mouth to respond, but a sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Mr. Calloway, a voice called from the hallway. We need to talk. James's expression darkened. Stay here, he said to Evelyn before opening the door. A man in a tailored suit stood on the other side, his face cold and unyielding. Evelyn recognized him immediately from photos. Richard Calloway. Father, James said evenly. I think you've had enough time playing bellhop, Richard said, his voice dripping with disdain. It's time to end this charade. Evelyn stepped into the doorway, her heart pounding. Mr. Calloway, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. This is my hotel. If you have something to say about how it's run, you can say it to me. Richard's gaze flicked to her, his eyes narrowing. Ah, the infamous Evelyn Carter. I see my son's been keeping you busy. I've been keeping your hotel successful. Evelyn shot back. Richard smirked. For now. But success is fragile, Ms. Carter. And you've built yours on very shaky ground. Evelyn bristled, but James stepped between them. Enough, he said firmly. If you want to attack someone, attack me. Leave her out of this. Richard laughed coldly. Protecting her, are you? How noble. But you're wasting your time, James. This hotel is a lost cause, and so is she. Evelyn's anger boiled over. You think you can just walk in here and tear everything down? This hotel is more than numbers on a balance sheet. It's people. It's guests who feel at home here, employees who've built their lives here. And I won't let you destroy that. For a moment, Richard seemed taken aback by her passion. Then he turned to James. You've made your choice, son. Don't come crying to me when it falls apart. With that, he strode away, his footsteps echoing down the hall. As the door closed, Evelyn let out a shaky breath. That's your father? James nodded, his jaw clenched. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Then we stop him first, Evelyn said, surprising even herself. James looked at her, his expression softening. You're willing to fight for this? Evelyn met his gaze, her determination unwavering. I'm not just fighting for the hotel. I'm fighting for everyone who believes in it, including me. A small smile tugged at James's lips. Then we're in this together. Over the following weeks, Evelyn and James worked side by side, strengthening the hotel's operations and preparing for the battle they knew was coming. Despite their rocky start, something began to shift between them. James's charm felt less like a weapon and more like a shield, and Evelyn found herself trusting him in ways she hadn't thought possible. One evening, as they reviewed plans in Evelyn's office, James looked up from his notes and said, You know, you're the strongest person I've ever met. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. That's a bit dramatic. I mean it, James said, his voice soft. You've built something incredible here, and I'm starting to think you're not just saving the hotel. You're saving me, too. Evelyn's breath caught. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Then James smiled. But don't let it go to your head, boss. Evelyn rolled her eyes, but her heart was lighter. As the days turned to weeks, the hotel flourished under their combined leadership. Richard Calloway's threats continued, but Evelyn and James faced them together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge. In the end, they weren't just saving Crystal Haven, they were building something new, something real.